is it that my US passport allows me to travel to 115 countries without a visa, while my husband's refugee travel document allows him to travel to, well, a whole lot less? If you've ever wondered why some people need visas while others do not, or why migrants and refugees have to trek through the desert and sneak across the border, or take dangerous boat journeys at a time when there are hundreds of thousands of international flights connecting every country around the world, you might be interested in learning a little bit more about the history of passports. Once upon a time, a passport was just an identity document. Apparently, the Romans were some of the first to use coins to identify themselves and distinguish themselves from those who were enslaved, while a number of other fascinating examples of passports existed in ancient times. In Japan, for example, there were these beautiful ornate scrolls. Before colonialism, West African tribes had passport masks, which were decorated in a way that identified their tribe, facilitating trade and different alliances. That just sounds so much cooler than this little piece of paper. But it was actually during the French Revolution that passports first emerged as a tool to control freedom of movement, at first deployed by the Ancien regime to ensure that peasants would not come into the cities. As a columnist who went by the name Le Pouchet wrote in the Moniteur Universel, to allow a man to travel is to allow him to do something that no one has the right to deny. It is a social injustice. That was the first time it became a political issue. But as more and more people started emigrating to the so-called New World, not so new for the indigenous communities who were already living there started to be more and more racial tensions and anxieties over who would make up the population. And while there were plenty of requirements to come to the United States, such as being mentally fit, generally healthy, and not a prostitute, it was not until 1882 that the government decided to see if immigration restrictions could be used to discriminate against an entire nationality with the Chinese Exclusion Act. Still, even though Chinese immigrants were technically not allowed to go to the United States, those wishing to come to the United States simply went to Mexico and walked across the border, then an open frontier. And come to think of it, this might have been the first example of quote-quote illegal immigration, which just goes to show that immigration is only legal if crossing a border is criminalized. But passports themselves did not become a standard requirement to cross borders until World War I, and even then they were seen as a temporary national security measure. There was even a conference in the aftermath of the war where the future of the passport requirement was hotly debated. On the one hand, it could help enforce national security. On the other hand, it would hamper freedom of movement. This wasn't just about people, it was also about trade and the general relationships between countries. Could it be that a world without passports might be better for national security? Unfortunately, they decided to keep passports, and with this came the ability to enforce discriminatory immigration policies, which came into full force with the 1924 immigration quotas, which enforced caps on immigrants from Southern Europe and the Middle East, while allowing immigration from Western Europe to be relatively unscathed in favor of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant America. A few years later, Jewish refugees fleeing the Holocaust faced this deadly racism when their ship was not allowed to dock in the United States, resulting in them being sent back to Europe. While I know many people would shudder recalling this history and vow to do everything in their power to make sure that it never happens again, the fact of the matter is that people fleeing unspeakable violence and persecution around the world continue to be denied entry to the United States and are unable to exercise their right to asylum. Much like the way that the Ancien regime of revolutionary France wanted to use passports as a means to control movement of poor people during the revolution, wealthy countries are now using their own national security as an excuse to shut the door to people from countries that have been racked by war and poverty, who often have nowhere else to turn. As a result of this fusion of racism, discrimination, and national security policies, even ordinary citizens from countries like Afghanistan, Somalia, and Iraq, who have no intention of moving to a new country, face limited travel options. Meanwhile, someone from a wealthy country like the United States, United Kingdom, Europe, South Korea, or Japan can see the world. Does that seem fair to you? If you like this video, there's more like it on the way. If you want to learn more about passports, borders, and the history of freedom of movement, don't forget to like and subscribe.